In Indian polity, we are going to discuss about Article 30, that is, right of minorities to establish and administer educational institutions. Okay, so here the minorities which are related to the linguistic and religious. Okay, so whether they are linguistic minorities or religious minorities, they also comes under the Article 30 and they have the right to establish and administer educational institutions. Okay, so first of all minorities shall have the right to establish and administer educational institutions. Okay, so each and every minority group have the right to establish, and not only establishing a institution but also they have the right to administer such educational institutions. Okay, so this is the first provision under Article 30. Okay, so coming to the second provision under Article 30 is compulsory acquisition of any property of a minority educational institutions. There is a compensation amount which is fixed by the state government. Okay, so here compulsory acquisition of any property which is related to the educational institution, and that particular educational institution is belongs to a minority group. Okay, so whenever the compulsory acquisition of that minority educational institution, so there is a compensation amount. Okay, so the compensation amount is awarding a money or compensation for anything. Okay, for any loss. Okay, so this provision, this important provision was added by the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978. Okay, so this important provision was added for the protection of the minorities' rights. Okay, so generally here we are talking about the minorities. Here minorities means less in number. Okay, so whether they are linguistic minorities or religious minorities. Okay, so on the basis of their religion they may be minority, on the basis of their language they may be minority. Okay, so each and every minority group has the right to establish and administer educational institutions. Okay, so whenever there is a compulsory acquisition of any property which belongs to a minority educational institutions, so there is a compensation amount was fixed by the state. Okay, so this important provision was added by 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978. Okay, so there is a one important provision or importance to the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978, that is fundamental right, that is Article 31, right to property, was deleted from the fundamental rights list by the or through 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978. Okay, okay, so the aid or grants by the state governments which are equally to the minorities as compared to the majorities. Okay, so whatever it may be, the aid or grants or funds which are given by the state government, so they are equally to the minorities. Here equally means state shall not discriminate against any educational institutions which are managed by a majority. Okay, it means there is no discrimination towards the educational institutions which are maintained by the minorities or majorities. Okay, so it means the grants are fund or aid by the state government which is equally to the minorities and majorities. Okay, so there is no discrimination on the basis of their majority or minority. Okay, so according to Article 30, we generally talks about only for the minorities, not for the other sections of the citizens. Okay, so the especially the right which is guaranteed to the minorities only for their establishment and administration of the educational institutions. Okay, so here the term is minority, which means the less in number. Okay, so the term minority is nowhere in the constitution. Okay, so in the constitution there is no term which is belongs to a minority. Okay, so Okay, so according to Article 30, the minority group has the right to establish and administer educational institutions, right? So, even they have the right to choose the medium of the instruction. Okay, so the medium of the educational institutions also have the choice of the minority educational institutions. There is no restrictions on the minority educational institutions on the basis of their medium. Okay, for example, there is a minority group. Okay, so they want to educate the children in one particular language, that is minority language, but this is the right to a minority educational institutions. There is no restrictions and there is no pressures from the state. Okay, it means the minority educational institutions have the right to establish and right to administer such educational institutions, and they can run the educational institutions in their own language. Okay, it means the teaching in that particular educational institutions which are belong to the minority, so their wish to own language. Okay, so they can impart or they can incorporate any language. Okay, so they can impart any language for their medium in the minority educational institutions. Okay, so this is very important in the Article 30. Okay, so according to Article 30, so the minority educational institutions are three types. Okay, so the first one is the institutions which got recognition and are receiving aid or fund from the state. This is the first type of the educational institutions. Okay, so the educational institutions which got the recognition, okay, recognition and they are receiving aid, it means fund from the state. Okay, and second one is institutions which got the recognition from the state but they are not receiving the aid or fund from the state. Okay, so this is the second type of the educational institutions. Okay, so these two types of educational institutions are regulated by the state, because here first type of educational institutions got recognition and aid from the state. Okay, and second institutions got recognition only. Here the state is recognized the educational institution, it means the regulatory power by the state. Okay, so here regulatory power means, for example, in educational institutions means there is a syllabus prescription and academic standards, discipline, sanitation and employment, for example teaching, non-teaching. Okay, so these matters which are related by the are regulated by the state government or state. Okay, so these are the regulatory powers of the state which are only from the recognition or aid. Okay. Okay, so coming to the third type of the minority educational institution, so the institutions which got recognition, okay, so sorry, educational institutions which are not recognized or receiving aid by the state. Okay, so here the state is not recognized any educational institution and the state is not giving any aid or fund to the educational institutions, so such type of educational institution has to free the administration. Okay, so it means that syllabus prescription, academic standards, discipline, sanitation, employment of the teaching and non-teaching staff. Okay, so these powers are only belongs to the particular educational institution. Okay, so state has no power to involve in such matters because there is no recognition, there is no aid or fund by the state government. Okay, so these educational institutions has to free to administer themselves. Okay, so but such operation of the general laws. Okay, so there are some general laws which are related to the educational institution, for example contract law, labor law, industrial law, tax law, economic regulations. Okay, So these general laws, the state can involve in these provisions, okay, but the educational institutions has to free to administer their educational institutions without any restrictions or without any pressures from the state, okay. Okay, so uh, we are listening about the article 30, right? So we completed the article 30 overall, the provisions which are under the article 30, okay. So coming to the important case, that is Malankaran Syrian Catholic College case 2007, okay. So according to this case, our Supreme Court given some important general principles along with the judgment, okay. So the Supreme Court given some guidelines or principles or important provisions along with the judgment in Malankara Syrian Catholic College case, okay. Okay, so the first principle or a guideline is, so the minorities educational institutions, so they have the right to establish and they have the right to administer such educational institutions. Even they have the right to choose their governing body, okay. So most of the educational institutions have the founders, okay. So the founders has the right to choose their governing body. Here governing body means managing body or management, okay. So they has the right to and they have the free to choose the management board or governing body, okay. So even the choice is given to the founders, okay. We can say this is the right to the founders who choose their governing body or management board, okay. Okay, so coming to the next important provision in this case is appointment, okay. So appointment in such educational institutions like teaching and non-teaching staff, okay. So they have the right to take any action regarding the staff in their educational institutions, okay. Okay, third important principle is admissions to the eligible students in that educational institutions, okay. So the governing body has the right to determine the admissions to the eligible students, okay. And there is a reasonable fee structure, okay. Only here we are talking about the reasonable fee structure in the educational institutions which are belongs to the minority group, okay. Okay, so next important provision is rights of minorities to ensure equality with majority, okay. So basically majority educational institutions they are running with more advantages, okay, because they have wealth, okay. So but whenever comes to the minority educational institutions, very less in number, okay. That's why the rights of minorities to ensure the equality with the majority. It means, it doesn't mean more advantageous position to the minorities, okay. So here there is no advantageous position to the minorities as compared to the majorities, but so to ensure equality, okay. So equality with the majority, okay. And there is no reverse discrimination in favor of the minority, okay. So only just equality with the majority, okay. So there are some general laws of land that is belongs to the educational institutions which are relating to the national interest, national security, social welfare, public order, morality, health, sanitation, taxation, etc., okay. So on the basis of these principles or these provisions, so the state can involve, okay. So these principles are relating to the educational institutions are same to the minority educational institutions and the same way majority educational institutions, okay. So it means applicable to all minority and majority also, Okay, so the third important provision or guideline is right to establish and administer educational institution is not absolute. Okay, so in Article 30 we said the right to establish and administer educational institutions which is related to the minority, so they have the right to establish and administer, but this is not absolute. Here not absolute means there is no right to maladminister in the educational institution. It means there is no wrong things which are going in the educational institutions. It means whenever there is a maladministration, so the government will take action against the minority educational institutions. Okay, so, there are some regulatory measures for ensuring the educational character and standards and maintaining academic excellence. Okay, so this is very necessary to the ensure the educational institutions. Okay, so the first one is checks on the administration. Okay, so this is very important in the educational institutions. Okay, and general welfare of the students and general welfare of the teachers. Here teaching means teaching and non-teaching staff also. Okay, so the appointment which is related to the teaching and non-teaching staff. Okay, so the welfare of the teaching and non-teaching staff and the welfare of the students also. Okay, so here students means there is some eligibility criteria and the qualifications and the eligibility for the students who are going to take admissions in the particular educational institutions. Okay, even there are some qualifications for the appointment in the service. Okay, and there are some service conditions, there are some exploitations in the educational institutions. So to refer and to check the administration, so there are some regulatory measures for ensuring the educational character or educational institutions. Okay, so whenever there was some unaided minority educational institutions, okay, so they have the freedom to appoint staff like teachers, lecturers, okay, by adopting a rational procedure of selection. Okay, so here rational procedure means knowledgeable workers or knowledgeable teachers. Okay, so unaided minority educational institutions have the freedom to appoint teachers or staff. Okay, so but they have to adopt some rational procedure for selection. Okay, here knowledgeable workers are very important in any educational institutions which are belong to the minority group. Okay, so whenever comes to the aided educational institutions, which means the funds which are given by the state government to the educational institutions, so there is doesn't alter any nature or character of the minority of the educational institutions, but the conditions of the state just to ensure the proper utilization of the aid. Okay, it means the educational institutions which is receiving aid from the state, so the state has the responsibility to ensure the proper utilization of the aid in that educational institutions. Okay, so without diluting the article 30, so the state can involve in the educational institutions on the basis of the utilization or proper utilization of the aid. Okay.